This is Continuum Drag, a weekly podcast revisiting television sci-fi, fantasy, and everything in between. This week, the ghost of Sierra de Cobre.
Supernaturally or otherwise, we are all haunted. Anyone who's lived in this past century, this last week, cannot escape being haunted. For some of us, it's a mass haunting, an all-pervading specter of guilt, or futility, or alienation that we suffer collectively. For others, the haunting is more private and more terrible because the ghosts are ours alone and we recognize them. Sometimes it takes so little to free ourselves of our ghosts. And if my believing in another man's haunting helps to free him, does it matter whether science calls his agony hallucinatory or real?
Welcome to Continuum Drag, the podcast being directly broadcast into crypts in case you're buried alive. I'm Luke, here with your co-host Jordan. What's real, Jordan?
What a horrible, horrible torture. Can you imagine being buried alive and then the only entertainment you have is this podcast?
Once a week, a new one is directly broadcast into your tomb.
Actually, I take that back. If you had no other entertainment and you're just sitting in a coffin for an entire week, this would really be a pleasure.
You don't think this would drive you mad?
No, I think I'd be waiting for it all week. I'm like, let's see what these dummies are talking about this week.
I wonder what they're going to cover next.
Yeah, I'm somehow in this scenario, I'm also not myself because I'm still recording the podcast.
I've just replaced you with a co-host.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple people could probably shift in without too much trouble.
All right. Well, this week we are covering the pilot / movie suggested by @CChupik on Twitter, The Ghost of Sierra de Cobre. Cobre? Cobre. I'm going to go with Cobre.
Cobre, I believe.
Cobre?
I mean, neither of us are Spanish, so...
Let's go back and forth on this all episode.
The Ghost of Sierra de Cobre.
It was shot in 1964 and was originally produced as a pilot for a proposed anthology series called The Haunted.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting, though, is this one was actually recently remastered and re-released on like 2K by Kino Lorber. So that's why we've got it, is we've took this DVD and are watching like this freshly restored version of it.
It looks pretty good. I mean, especially, we'll talk about it, but there's two versions, obviously, of this. There's the Ghost of Sierra de Cobre, and which is what we're going to be talking about, and then the shorter version that aired on TV called The Haunted. And the version for The Haunted has not been remastered, so it doesn't look quite as good. And
I'll tell you an interesting fact right now, Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
It was never shown on television, that pilot, or the TV movie.
Is that true? I thought for some reason it aired in a couple places, maybe not the United States.
Yeah, no, I think what you're thinking of is the Ghost of Sierra de Cobre, the like recut movie version, was released as a feature film overseas.
Ah, okay.
But like apparently that DVD is the first incarnation to arrive on the American shores. Just a fun fact I was reading about when I was reading it is that pilot that's on the DVD, the 50-minute version, like floated around through collectors. In fact, the reason it's on the DVD at all is a film historian bought it on eBay for $90.
Oh, nicely done.
And then he helped Kino Lorber kind of put together this package, and it's like his copy that's on the DVD.
So this was a CBS show,
mm-hmm.
And the only reason it didn't ever air is, from what I saw, was that it was amongst a bunch of pilots that were produced, and what happened was CBS was going through, as TV channels do, was going through a purge, and all the executives were fired, so they got rid of all of the TV shows except for The Wild Wild West. That was the only show that stayed on. All the other shows, including, well, what would we call The Haunted, were canceled.
I mean, everybody knows at these big studios, once a year, there's a night where crime is legalized and anyone can be murdered.
That's right.
So this was actually written, produced, and very abruptly directed by Joseph Stefano, writer, or I guess adapter of Psycho.
I don't think he was actually a director. He only was a kind of a stand-in, wasn't he?
Yeah, I believe the director who was supposed to make this ended up getting sick at the last second, so he had to step in and kind of take over. So really, I think one of his few, if only, directing credits. But he was also a producer and co-writer of the original Outer Limits, so I guess this like that would have come out just before they were trying to make this sort of haunted, spooky anthology. So like it seems to fall into what he was working on at the time.
Mm-hmm. And I have to say, for someone who's not a director, maybe more credit to go to the DOP, but this of what I should say is I think our third of a trilogy of paranormal investigator TV movies. This is, I think, the most interesting style. I think the look of this is, I like it a lot more than some other things we've watched.
Yeah, beautifully shot in black and white. Did you look into the cinematographer?
I did, and I can't remember who he is now because I have to look at my notes. Do you have anything on him?
Yeah, I do. It's Conrad Hall, who is a 3-time Academy Award winner.
That's pretty good.
He won for, what did he win for? I got it here. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, American Beauty, and Road to Perdition.
Wow.
And I think here's one I think you're probably a big fan of. He also shot Cool Hand Luke.
Oh, I do like Cool Hand Luke. Yeah, that's a good movie too. Yeah, I mean, this movie looks great, and obviously it's been restored and it's been lovingly put back together, but it looks great.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of care went into this show. It really stands out from some of the other things we watched because it's just like you can just see how beautifully shot and lit it is. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And of course, before we get into it, Jordan, it's starring a 36-year-old Martin Landau.
Yeah, I like Martin Landau. He's one of those actors who's got, he's passed away now, but he had like hundreds and hundreds of credits, and it's just nothing you've ever heard of. Like, every now and then there would be something. Obviously, he won an Oscar, but he just was one of those working actors with a weird face, and I really enjoy those kind of actors.
I don't think I've ever seen him looking this young, and he is my age, basically.
But doesn't he still look like he's 65 years old somehow?
His facial features are so soft. I actually was surprised by what a boyish face he had at this age.
He's an odd choice for a lead, but I think he's very good in it.
Well, he's very charismatic. I guess that's what got him through all that time with his unusual face.
It's true.
All right, Jordan. Well, this was shot and basically created in 1964. As we mentioned, it was never really released in the States and was finally released overseas. So I'm going to give this date of release as August 20th, 1967. That seems to be the Japanese release date and the only one I could find for like an exact date when it came out.
Wow, that's a long time after they filmed it. That's almost 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, obviously once it got purged at the network, I guess they had to figure out what to do with it for a while. Mm-hmm. So since I'm going to pinpoint that as the date it came out, here was what's happening in the world around August 20th, 1967.
Okay.
On August 13th, just about a week before it comes out in Japan, the first lineup of Fleetwood Mac makes its live debut.
Look at that.
You're a big Fleetwood Mac fan, right?
Some of their stuff's okay. I'm not really a big fan, but they're fine.
And then about 9 days after that, Jordan, August 29th, the final episode of The Fugitive airs.
Oh. Have you ever watched The Fugitive, the TV show?
Never.
No, I haven't either. It's one of those ones where I kind of want to watch it, but I have a feeling I don't know how well it's aged, Like to watch like 7-8 seasons of that sort of television, but I am interested.
I think that's one you just find like the top 15 of or top 10
right.
of and just like watch those. You watch the pilot, you watch the top 10, you get watch the finale.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Because I don't think it like changes much storyline wise from episode to episode.
Yeah, you're probably right.
All right, Jordan, you ready to get into this?
Yeah, let's do it.
Here is the IMDb summary for the ghost of Sierra de Cobre. Terrified of being buried alive by mistake, a woman puts a phone in her crypt to be able to call home if she needs help. She dies, and nothing happens. One day, the phone suddenly rings. Paranormal investigator Nelson Orion, bracket Martin Landau, end bracket, is brought in.
That's too much. That's too much.
I would say it both doesn't really cover what the movie's about and is very long.
Like, all you need to say is paranormal investigator investigates possible mother ghost
spooky
to
phone
phones.
Call.
Yeah, spooky phone call. Yeah, that's right.
So this starts off with some truly great optically printed transitions for the title card. Like, this blew my mind right off the top.
Wasn't this great? I was kind of blown away by how good this looked, because we start on, it's a graveyard, right? With like a very creepy moaning from this woman.
Yeah, it's like a beautifully done matte painting. It's all foggy and spooky graveyard. And then the camera kind of pushes in on the graveyard, and then the entire graveyard fades into an overhead of a city, and the tombstones transition to becoming skyscrapers. So it's just like a perfect transition between graveyard into this cityscape where the tombstones are now skyscrapers. You get the title card, and then the entire city is washed away by a wave that like a tsunami runs over the entire city, and that transitions us into Martin Landau standing on a beach. And I was just like, this is gorgeous.
It's funny because I think you said it at the very beginning of this recording. The amount of care that is put into this is kind of startling, at least based on the other sort of failed TV pilots we've seen before. And it's like, there's no real reason for any of these other than to set the tone, really, and establish where you are. But it's like, wow, what a great way of doing that. And we're into it, you know?
Yeah, what I like, too, is, and this is very, maybe, more esoteric than our podcast usually needs to do. But what I liked is it's like that opening shot of the graveyard is very kind of like gothic horror, like very like woman in the black dress or something, very gothic feeling. But that transition from the graveyard into like the cityscape is just like, oh, it's going to be a very urban version of gothic. Like I was just like, I'm really into what this is setting up.
It's a good opening and it's creepy, and the woman kind of moaning the whole time never stops. I should say the opening of the pilot, the shorter TV version, it's mostly this, but they've cut it down a little bit, and I think to the detriment of the shorter version. It's not quite as stylized.
Well, and I think obviously this must have been the intention, since on the TV version the title of the film was replaced by The Haunted. The intention must have been this is going to be the opening credit for every episode. It's just like graveyard, city, beach.
Yeah.
But the story proper starts out at the spooky old Mandor Mansion.
Mm-hmm. Oh, classic Mandor Mansion.
Good alliteration. Mm-hmm. Henry Mandor is the blind heir to the Mandor fortune.
The blind heir, yes. I said the blind hair, but the blind heir, yes. What do you think of this guy's blind acting?
Oh, he's a rabbit, right? He's a big rabbit.
That's right.
It is very funny. He's actually weirdly a minor character in the episode in some ways. Like the story's centered around him, but he has little to do. It's really weird because they've made the character blind. They like kind of don't use him because he's, I don't know, are they treating his disability like he can't do anything?
I think that is kind of what it is. They're like, well, he's blind. There's no real reason for him to be blind other than they don't really want him to be an active participant too much as opposed to just reacting to these phone calls, which is what we're going to see in this next scene. But for the rest of the movie, he's sort of treated as, for lack of a better word, a sort of invalid who needs to be led around, who sort of can't do much other than react. But that is what we're going to see in this next scene, is that we kind of get this long shot of this telephone cable that goes all the way to his room. Is that what we see now?
Yeah, I mean, you're basically right. That is kind of like there's a cable running from his room to this crypt where his mother's kept. I just wanted to talk briefly about Henry, because you mentioned like this idea that is in the pilot is he's kind of an invalid, he's kind of left at home. But when they're kind of introducing him, like he's obviously this potentially wealthy heir, although apparently his family fortune is basically all that's left is the huge property he lives on, that's just worth like $7.25 million.
Yeah, it's not bad.
What a time when that was a lot of money.
I mean, I'd still take $7.2 million, Luke.
Absolutely. But they also talk about how he's traveled the entire world and blind. So like there's this indication that he's actually very able, but it's just so weird that they've left him to the side.
Yeah. Doesn't he say though, he's like, my traveling days are done though. So
he does.
I wasn't sure if they were implying that the blindness is a new thing.
No, because his wife, who we're going to meet in a second, she even says, she's like, he saw the whole world. Oh, well, I guess that's not right because he's blind. So I guess he likes heard the whole world.
It's like, oh, he's really good at sightseeing. Just kidding.
But yes, his wife, Vivia, is returning home from 3 weeks in New York City, attending to, I guess, a bunch of charity donations that Henry's late mother made in her will. Mm-hmm. And returning home, she finds Henry freaking out because, as you mentioned, this phone calls have been coming in every night from his dead mother. And like every time he picks up the phone, there's a direct line to this crypt where his mom's buried. And all he gets when he picks up the phone is just a woman weeping. He's
assuming it's his mother. He's not quite sure, but all the information he has sort of adds up. It's the phone goes to his mother's coffin. There's a woman screaming. She did say, please put the phone by me. So he's sort of adding up that, like, that must be my mother calling me. But he doesn't know why. It's like she's torturing him for some reason, why she keeps calling.
And she's been dead about a year. And the reason this direct line was put into her crypt, which is the funniest thing I've ever heard of. Like, I've never seen a premise like this before, and it made me laugh every time I saw a phone line into a crypt. Mm-hmm. But the idea was when she was a kid, she got lost or trapped inside the family mausoleum. And since then, she's had a deadly fear of being buried alive. So her, like, last will and testament was just like, you got to run a phone line from my crypt to my son's bedroom so I can call him if I need help, and you have to leave my coffin lid open so I can grab that phone.
This is not spoiling anything from later, but maybe in the next, in terms of the time of the movie, in the next 10 minutes or so, we're actually going to see the other end of the line and see the coffin, and it is that. It's an open casket with a skeleton in it. You know, it's just like, oh, that can't be sanitary.
And she makes matters worse. Just before these phone calls started, and just after Vivia, Henry's wife, left, the entire house staff of their mansion quit on the same day. And then the next day, a strange new housekeeper showed up to say she's here to take care of him. A woman named Pauline.
Yeah, Paulina.
Paulina, you're correct.
There's this idea there. She's sort of mysterious and ethereal, and you're not quite sure. She's always kind of shrouded in black and seems like she's in the shadows, and she's always peeking around corners. And you know right off the bat, there's something hinky here.
Yeah, I mean, she's got a real Nosferatu haircut.
Yeah.
And so she sort of walks in when Henry's telling Vivia all about his time while she was away. And as soon as Vivia sees her, she starts freaking the fuck out. Hard cut. This is where our hero, Martin Landau, playing Nelson Orion, enters the story.
Mm-hmm. For anyone who's listened to previous episodes of the podcast, again, I'll refer to this as our trilogy of paranormal investigators. And one thing I like is that all paranormal investigators have to have a day job.
It is true.
So his name is Nelson Orion, and he is some sort of architect. They say at one point, I wrote it down, that he's the foremost restoration specialist in the country. So he designs buildings or something like that. He restores buildings. And then in, what was that one with Leonard Nimoy?
Oh, the race car driver one.
Yeah.
It's, baffled.
So yeah, baffled exclamation point. He was a race car driver who was a paranormal investigator at night. And then the other one was Spectre. And he was like a former detective, I think.
They were former criminologists, I think.
Yeah, and now he's also a paranormal investigator. So I just like that there's this idea that you want to have that as a lead character, but to make it believable, they have to be paying the bills somehow.
I mean, it's one of those occupations. There's a lot of different ways into it. You can take a lot of different school paths.
Yeah. There's a lot of transferable skills.
Yes, he's a very successful architect. He even has an employee who midway through the movie will drop by, a gentleman named Mr. Sloan, who, fun fact, was previously in Gemini Man, though I didn't recognize him.
Oh, I didn't either. Who was he in Gemini Man? Just someone?
I think he was in that episode where there were two Gemini Men.
Oh, okay. Were there two Gemini Men? Yeah, that was a bad episode.
Yeah, he's the one who kind of tells us that he's the world's foremost, or the country's foremost restoration expert. And at some point he says, and you're almost a great architect. This guy really disapproves of his side gig.
What I like is this guy seems to always just show up in a convertible. There's at least 3 scenes where he just shows up like, hey, check out my car.
Yeah, he was great because he only shows up to be like, don't forget you're an architect. He's constantly being like, listen, we have a meeting with the city council about saving a heritage building. You really need to be ready for it.
And Martin Landau's like, did I tell you about ghosts?
And I like this guy's supposed to be his employee, but could not talk down to his own boss more.
Yeah, it actually was. It wasn't entirely clear what their relationship was, but I do like that the guy's whole role seems to be just trying to keep Orion on schedule.
You know what is fun too, Jordan, that I've never seen? Well, I don't know if I've never seen it, but it really stood out to me, is there's an entire kind of patch of dialogue right off the top, because we know his name is Nelson Orion, where Vivia is trying to write him a check, and she's like, well, let me write you a check here. Orion, O''Ryan? He's like, no, Orion, like the constellation.
Mm-hmm.
And it never occurred to me, but I'm like, I guess, yeah, you wouldn't know how that's spelled unless someone says it out loud to you.
It is a weird name, Nelson Orion. The show should just be called Orion.
The Orion Files.
The Orion Factor.
Anyway, we'll get back on track. But yes, his side gig, his hobby gig, is he's a paranormal investigator, or as he says, I think his official term is psychical consultant.
Psychical?
They constantly refer to things as psychical events.
That's funny. Well, he's a psychical investigator.
And he appears to have gotten into this because, as we know, he's a man who restores heritage homes because he's an architect of some sort.
He's the foremost restoration specialist in the country.
There you go. And in that job, it has resulted in him encountering a lot of hauntings, which appears to be why he has these psychical abilities.
Does he have abilities, though, or is it just that he's very in tune with what's happening?
That's what it is. I think he's encountered so many of them, he can sense when he's in a place with an actual supernatural event and when he's not.
But he's also come across a lot of instances where people have called him and it's clearly a hoax. So it seems like his first instance is to assume that something's a hoax, and he has to kind of prove it's not.
Yeah, he seems to primarily be like, I think he seems to be a skeptic, but he also knows what is real when he bumps into it.
And have we mentioned that he has a, what would you call it, housekeeper, I suppose?
Yes, Mary Finch, who works at his, what would you call that, a beach cliffside house?
It's the weirdest thing because they've done like a matte painting of this, what would be from the 60s, a very modern house structure that's right on the edge of the cliff. Not even just on the edge of the cliff, it's actually hanging off the cliff, which is a really cool looking kind of headquarters base. I don't know why, there's no real reason for it, but it looks cool.
It's like the bad guy's house in Lethal Weapon, basically.
It actually does look more like a villain's lair than it does a good guy's headquarters, but regardless.
Sorry, you were excited to talk about his housekeeper, Mary Finch.
Well, I was just going to say, the housekeeper, she's sort of like, I think they were positioning her to be sort of Watson to Holmes in this, sort of the, just someone to always be bouncing the ideas off of, and she's a real skeptic of ghosts, despite working for him for seemingly years.
Yeah, she's a real sassy Scully to his Mulder.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And she doesn't have much play in this, but yeah, you're right. She's kind of like there for him to bounce ideas off of, which is a useful tool for a TV show, but we probably won't end up talking about her very much.
No, I mean, there's only really, I think, one major scene about 3/4 through the movie where he sits down and just like, literally just explains everything that's happening, and she's like, interesting.
But we'll get back to kind of the plot of this movie is Blind Henry has asked his wife Vivia to hire Orion to investigate the case of his dead mother's phone calls. So they end up meeting up at the old family mausoleum in the middle of the night,
As
which
you
is
do,
a funny
yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Where also, just in case we weren't sure that housekeeper was no good, Paulina, she's just skulking around the graveyard the whole time.
At first, I was like, is she a ghost? What is happening? Because that's how she was acting. She was acting like a sketchy ghost.
It's true. But what we kind of learn is both Vivia and Orion are skeptical that the phone calls are actually a genuine haunting. But they head into this expansive Mandor mausoleum, the family mausoleum. And like, this mausoleum is gigantic.
Yeah, it's actually one thing I think they cut a little bit for the shorter version of this, because it seems like just walking down this mausoleum takes forever. There's hallway after hallway and like dissolve into another room and dissolve into another room. I was like, how big is this place?
Yeah, it seems huge. And there is like some sort of like POV of a ghost wandering the halls, wailing the whole time.
And I should say it now. What is the effect they use on the ghost? Because we're going to see the ghost a couple times, and I don't know how to describe what the ghost's face looks like.
Yeah, that's it. I can probably get into that. Yeah, because kind of what happens is they end up in the mother's crypt where we get to see the phone, we get to see the decomposed mother, and at first, an invisible version of the ghost, it's all wind and wailing, like spooks them. It blows open a door, and Orion's able to, I guess, calm its nerves with his psychical calming presence.
I suppose, yeah.
But when they go to leave the mausoleum, Vivia, the wife's like, left my purse in the crypt, gotta go back for it.
Yeah, I like that. And she's like, and he's like, do you want me to come with you? She's like, no, I need to prove that, like, I'm not scared because I don't believe in this. I was like, that's a big mistake.
Yeah, and so when she goes to get her purse, the ghost actually manifests this time. And you're right, it's an interesting effect. And I think what it is they've taken an actor, they've done up all this kind of makeup on that actor, and then when they shoot them on film, they've left it in negative. So you're looking at a reverse image, but how they've painted her up is to kind of make her look, I don't know, I guess the correct, like, inverse colors, but like as a result it gives this like really creepy effect where she's sort of in negative, sort of not negative, but she doesn't fit the space around her.
It doesn't look like this is technology from 1965 or so in some ways it looks a little bit hokey, but another way I think in some ways in an effective look. Like it doesn't, you're still like, oh, that looks weird. So I was on board.
I also was just like, everything from 50, 60 years ago now is going to look a little dated to us, but like clearly the effect and the idea behind it was at least interesting.
Yeah. And so this ghost doesn't really do much other than kind of freak her out.
Yeah. And like, we don't get to know much. It just kind of see the ghost. We know it's menacing her, and then old Orion busts back in and rescues her, and he hauls her back to his cliffside beach house where she's spends the night, I guess, so she can get over her fright.
Yeah, this part I was confused because what I thought happened was he brought her back to the house that they were essentially at, and he stayed the night. And I was like, oh, that's presumptuous. But he brought her back all the way to his place. I'm like, didn't she live like on the property that she just fainted on?
I'm not sure if the mausoleum's on the property or across town.
I thought it was on the same property. Maybe that makes more sense then.
You know what? They never give a real explanation for that because they keep saying the Mandor estate is huge. So why isn't the mausoleum on the property?
Either way, she spends the night, but they make sure to let you know that nothing funny happened because they're in two different rooms.
Yeah, nothing untoward. She's a married woman, Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
But while Vivi is at Orion's place, she notices a painting on the wall. It's a painting of the mission of de Sierra de Cobre. It's a place that Orion once was asked to come and investigate a haunting and the murder of an American school teacher by the ghost there.
Mm-hmm.
But it is also a place, like we've said, he is skeptical. He doesn't fall into ghosts easily. And when he was brought to this town in Mexico to investigate this ghost and this murder, he discovered, or I guess believed, that the haunting was entirely a hoax and that the school teacher had died as a result of ODing on a hallucinogenic drug while at the mission. And he felt that the people of that town had created the ghost more as a tourist trap than as an actual haunting.
Yeah.
But because the ghost of Sierra de Madre was described as a bleeding ghost, and the ghost we saw is also described to us as a bleeding ghost, we know there's some sort of connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of those things you just have to kind of forgive that. You know there's going to be some sort of connection just because I think as viewers of TV, because you've seen these things so many times, you're a little bit more savvy. And we know that there's no way this is a coincidence. Like, why would they ever mention this? But regardless, I think it's, I think you're still interested in what's going to be happening.
And they tease out some of this information over the course of the episode. We're kind of paraphrasing here. But they return to the Mandor estate to see Henry. Orion kind of explains to him he's pretty sure these phone calls are a hoax. He doesn't believe his mother is a ghost that's coming out of that crypt and using the phone. Which what I like too is at some point someone's just like, how can this rotted body use a phone? And he's just like, well, scientific theory says ghosts are their own physical entities. And I was like, what scientific theory?
Well, and there's a speech he gives, and if you'll indulge me for a minute, it's my favorite chunk of dialogue, and I think it explains this kind of style of this. And he says, and I wrote it down, when they're talking about ghosts and he's trying to explain that, ghosts could exist, he goes, supernaturally or otherwise, we are all haunted. Anyone who lived in this past century, this last week, cannot escape being haunted. For some of us, it's a mass haunting, an all-pervading specter of guilt and futility or alienation that we suffer collectively. For others, the haunting is more private, more terrible because the ghosts are ours alone, and we recognize them. Sometimes it takes so little to free ourselves of our ghost. And if my believing in another man's haunting helps to free him, does it matter whether science calls his agony hallucinatory or real?
I also enjoyed that speech.
It was almost like a Shakespearean sort of like soliloquy, and I was like, wow, in the middle of the show?
It was really I felt it was this great way of being like, anyone who lives in the modern world, they're haunted, whether by a ghost or by our own physical construct. I'm like, okay, cool.
I know. I imagine you're listening to someone talk that way. You're like, okay, convince me.
But this is the kind of talk he gives to Henry now. Is just like, I believe in ghosts. I think they're real, but I don't think there's one affecting you currently. And Henry does not want to hear that because madness runs in his family, and the alternative means he's losing his mind. And to kind of back him up, Henry, that is, the new maid Paulina, she's brought in, and turns out she is from Sierra de Cobre, and she accuses Orion of being a charlatan. She knows for a fact there was a real ghost in that mission because her own daughter was splashed with its blood. And so there's this kind of like back and forth of like, does Henry trust Orion or does Henry trust this creepy new housekeeper?
Yeah, that was an odd turn because she sort of gets very aggressive and was like, and you're the reason to, like, you shouldn't hire this guy. He's a charlatan and he was just there to like ruin the local economy and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, that's weird and even more of a coincidence.
Yeah, I mean, this is where you can kind of see it's like, oh, this is a real coincidence. The Sierra de Cobre keeps coming up. And kind of while they're having this conversation to Henry in this room, at that exact moment, there's like a window side seat, like a bench that sort of has a storage compartment in it, but it's been locked down for years. It starts shaking and banging like someone's trapped inside. And it causes Vivia to have to leave the room because she's so freaked out. And even Orion has to admit, he's just like, I don't believe your mother is calling you, but that right now, that was definitely psychical. I can guarantee it.
That was definitely psychical.
It's clear he believes in ghosts, and he's actually pointing out things that are true. Like, he's seen ghosts have happened, there are like weird supernatural things happening, but he's also being like, you're not being haunted by a ghost. So it was an interesting dichotomy of just like, literally, we're having a character be like, it's a hoax. Well, there are actual haunting things. He's saying, oh, well, that is actually a haunting right now.
It's like going to a room, you're like, not a ghost, not a ghost, that's a ghost, not a ghost, not a ghost, that's a ghost.
Well, that's kind of what it was. It was,
yeah.
I have never seen that in a plot for a ghost. Usually, you're either like, there are ghosts or there aren't ghosts. I've never seen one there's like, some things are ghosts, some things aren't. They could be happening at any moment.
They should just they had a scene where like he's just sitting reading a book with someone else, and then every time they hear a creak, they look over to him and he's like, not a ghost, not a ghost. He's like, yep, that one was a ghost.
That one. Yeah. There's this sort of, it lays down kind of a mystery of like what's really going on if there are some ghosts and some not. And as he's going to leave the house, he kind of spies on old Vivian, Paulina, the housekeeper. And as he spies on them, Paulina's like giving her this like strange little potion that's a tranquilizer to calm Vivia's nerves. Mm-hmm. And Paulina's like talking to her and trying to calm her down. And Vivia's sort of admitting to locking someone in somewhere alive, indicating that maybe she is responsible for the death of the mother. Like they really lay down a lot of red herrings in this like little scene of like what is really going on. Vivia's not telling us something.
Well, you know that something's weird's happening and that these two are probably in cahoots in some way.
Mm-hmm, exactly. So Orion basically returns to his beach house, and we get one of the most random scenes possible in the middle of this movie. Is he heads down to his beach. His housekeeper, Mary Fitch, is sitting in a beach chair fishing in the ocean for some reason. And there's just a random young blonde woman, like, sunbathing nearby.
Yeah, what was this?
I don't know, because basically Orion walks up to her and he's like, hey, how's it going? She's like, good. He's like, you want to go on a date to a haunted house? She's like, oh, yeah, fuck yeah, I do.
And that's pretty much it.
It was the craziest scene where it's just a woman there. The two of them start chatting for no reason. She's into him. He's into her. She really loves the idea of being invited to a haunted house on a date next Friday. And he's like, all right, I'll pick you up here on the beach Friday night. She's like, on this beach right here on Friday night. I will come back here. And she's like, yes, please return to this beach.
Why do you think this scene was put in? The only thing I could think was there was a worry that it's going to look like he was having an affair with the wife, so they stuck in another possible love interest to show that he wasn't interested. Otherwise, I can't figure out why this scene was in. And even then, it's clumsy at best.
Well, and I kept thinking, because when he's inviting her to this haunted house on Friday, because he's got a dinner there, but it's also an investigation, and you can be my date, I thought it was somehow going to tie into the Mandor case, but he's referring to a different case he's going to work later, so it never comes back up. Honestly, the only thing I can figure out is it just felt like somewhere a note someplace was just like, oh, we got to know this guy's a ladies' man. We got
oh, right. Yeah, maybe.
Like, that's the time on television where, like, if your hero's not a ladies' man, what is he?
Why are we watching?
Which is even funnier because, like, it's not like Martin Landau's, like, necessarily, like, a typical handsome man. So watching him, like, ask this woman out, it's equally funny because it just doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, my note was, he finds some blonde at the beach. He asks her out. What is happening? And because that's it. The scene's just over. And I'm pretty sure this has been cut out from the shorter version too, which you can do easily and there's no effect.
Yeah, it's unrelated to anything. I do feel like this was probably shot for the TV show more than anything to like be like, we gotta let everyone know, ladies' man.
Anyways, he goes back, and I think this is the scene where he lights candles for like 10 minutes.
Yeah, this is basically it. He goes back up to his house and like, and as you mentioned too, it's also the scene where he breaks everything down for his housekeeper, Mary Finch. Essentially, he lets us and her know that the ghost is not using the phone. That's a hoax because, quote, no self-respecting ghost would use the devil's invention.
I love that. I thought that was so good. I was like, yeah, it makes sense. That's it. You can't argue that.
You really can. So phone calls, not ghost. Number 2, the mother died of natural causes. No reason to be a ghost. So mother is not the ghost. Point 3, the only time actual psychical events have happened, actual ghost sightings have happened, there's only one participant who's been consistent, and that's Vivia. She's the only one who's actually being haunted.
Mm-hmm.
So what we come to learn basically in the scene is just like, there is a haunting going on, but it's not Henry who's being haunted, it's Vivia.
Right. And I think, is this where we see, it does like a close-up of the painting and there's like the ghost starts manifesting?
Well, he takes the painting down and there's like, just like, they look at the painting and they do like a weird wavy effect over the painting, like, ooh, what does this painting have to do with anything?
And then I think he pulls out a book on the Sierra de Cobre, and I was like, is this a book researching that, or did he write a book? What is the point of that?
I also thought my assumption also was like, this is a book he wrote about the case.
That's what I thought. I'm like, he had a lot to say. It's a pretty thick book.
But while he's kind of doing this, surprisingly at this moment, basically Henry, Vivia, and housekeeper Paulina all drop by his house at the same time.
Yeah, the door sort of swings open and they're there.
I guess basically Henry had Paulina drive with him out there because he's there to tell Orion that he's completely convinced now that his mother is haunting him, so he's going to sell his entire estate and just run away.
But not only that, he's there to thank Orion for proving it to him. And I remember I thought, I don't know if he has proven that. Like, for Henry, it's like, yeah, case closed. I was like, but he hasn't really done anything yet.
Well, and Orion has been very clear in stating, your mother is not haunting you.
Right. But this guy wants to pay him.
Yeah, he just wants to pay him some money and get this over with. And it's at this point that basically Orion just turns to Vivia and says, hey, you got to come clean. You got to tell us what's really going on here because you're the one who's really being haunted. And Vivia basically gives a breakdown of what's really been going on here. Like, this is all too much for her. So she kind of explains that she, in fact, also grew up in Sierra de Cobre. Her and her mother sort of scammed tourists there by feeding them ayahuasca and then leading them on tours of the mission, which is where the reputation for this ghost came from. Is they would basically get tourists, they'd have them trip balls, take them into spooky corridors, and, that was their tourist trade, basically.
Yeah, so people thought they were seeing things because they were high as a kite, and then they'd get money off of it.
Yeah. And one day, this American school teacher showed up, and they dosed her, but she had a high tolerance for the drug, so when it didn't work, she started getting pissed off with the tour guides, apparently. So this Vivia's mother upped her dosage, but it was too much ayahuasca, so the teacher went insane, and they just locked her inside of a tomb and left her there to die because she had lost her mind on drugs.
Yeah, so that's what happened.
So there never was a ghost, just a lady locked in a tomb, tripping out real hard.
Yeah.
What is really happening now is that school teacher's back. She's haunting Vivia because she wants justice for her murder.
Yeah, I guess that's what we've realized, that this ghost the whole time is the school teacher who wants revenge or something, or I don't know, something.
And if you haven't deduced it yet, Paulina the housekeeper, Henry's new housekeeper who showed up out of the middle of nowhere, she is in fact Vivia's mother.
Yeah, so it's been the whole, like, some sort of scam, but we even from the beginning, we got the sense that Vivia, whatever her name is, didn't realize her mother was going to show up. Yeah,
this is a little bit nebulous here, but what we kind of learned from Vivia here is her mother showed up out of the blue after years of estrangement. Like, she really hated her mother. Somehow she found out about the marriage, and I'm not sure how, because it's been a year since the mother died, but maybe she read it in the paper or something. But anyway, she's shown up. She paid off the house staff to leave so that she could move in and start gaslighting Henry. And she's basically there because she wants a piece of that Mandor fortune. She wants some of her daughter's good luck here.
Do you think, because there's an interesting difference in the two versions as we go into the last act of this movie, do you think that Vivia was always just trying to get Henry's fortune, or do you think it was sort of like there was a little bit of contractual, she knew she was going to get something out of it, but she still did love him, blah, blah, blah?
I mean, I think my opinion was that Vivian married him for the correct reasons, but like it was also just a bonus for a person who grew up poor to like now be wealthy.
Right.
And that the mother showed up out of the blue and kind of, she's been tranking her the whole time. Like her mother's has a very forceful personality, and she basically fell into this like classic servitude to her mother when she was a child, I think is what we're supposed to think.
Right. And they mentioned a few times, they're like, Paulina, they're like, she gets whatever she wants. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
it is that question, like, why did Paulina show up now? And there's also the question of just like, why did the ghost show up now?
Yeah, I mean, it's all sort of like, if once you start breaking it down, you're like, I know it's supposed to be coincidental, but I'm like, maybe it's a little too coincidental that all this stuff's happening at once, but regardless.
Yeah, maybe the ghost followed the mother up from Mexico.
Yeah, right.
But doesn't seem to be haunting the mother, just Vivia. Anyway, Paulina, the housekeeper / mother, has been waiting outside in Henry's car, in Henry's car the whole time. She wasn't allowed inside the house because she's the help. And there's this quick scene where like the school teacher ghost like goes into the car and like throws the car to neutral and tries to like drive it off the side of the cliff.
Yeah, and then old Orion like runs out and like tries holding it. And I like that he just like gets dragged for a while. And I think what you're supposed to get from the scene is that he stopped it, but it looks like the car just stopped on its own and he was just dragged along.
Yeah, like it is. He is essentially like grabbing a window pane of the car and dragging his heels as if that's somehow going to stop the moving car. And it doesn't seem like it's going to. So I also wonder, I'm like, are we supposed to think that like he used his psychical presence to calm the ghost to stop it?
Yeah, maybe. Either way, it stops just before it goes over the edge.
So at this point, basically, Orion's got everything out in the open. Henry knows everything that's happened. Vivia is guilty by proxy of a murder. Paulina is her mother, who is perhaps more guilty of this murder. And Henry's just like, listen, you guys, I can't deal with any of this. Housekeeper Mary Finch, take me home. I'm done here. We're over.
He's like, guys, I'm blind. I need help. Take me home.
Take me home. And Vivia at this point it's all out in the open. She's broken down. She's like, listen, just take me to the cops. I want to be punished. I want to satisfy this ghost revenge. Let's just get this over with. But her mother, Paulina, she's not down with that. She always gets her way. So she grabs a knife and she's just going to stab Orion to death.
What I like though, she gets the knife from upstairs and she has to come all the way downstairs, and then she goes over to Orion to stab him. But just at that moment where she's gonna stab Orion, the old school teacher ghost shows up.
Yeah, it bursts right out of that painting, like the Kool-Aid Man, just like pops right out of it,
as ghosts do.
Floats on over and compels Paulina to stab herself to death.
Yeah, it's sort of like she has the knife in the air and the ghost makes it look like it's like, oh yeah, you think you're going to stab someone? And then she stabs herself. One stab, she's dead. And again, let me mention, almost at this point is where the TV pilot ends, but the movie extends for another 15 minutes or so.
Yeah, Vivia is now standing over her mother's body with Orion. The ghost fades away and, Vivia's pretty broken down. She just asks Orion, please put my mom's body in the car. I'm going to drive to the cops, turn myself in, and end this. And just like, I'm tired of all the lying. Just let's go. But before Vivia can drive away, she's got her mother's body in the car. She's going to head out to the cops. It's a bit of a back and forth. Like, there's this weird thing where she almost drives away and then doesn't drive away. But really, the meat of the scene is her mother's ghost appears in the car with her, basically threatening her with another bottle of tranquilizer, like, take your tranquilizer, like she always did as, I guess, a living spirit. And Vivia freaks out, throws the car into drive, and drives straight off the beachside cliff next to Orion's house.
Yeah, and just flips the car and just smashes into the rocks on the bottom of the beach.
I mean, it's a very fun scene where an actual car gets driven off a cliff.
Yeah, yeah, no, it looks good. And you're left thinking, she didn't make it.
She is dead. Her car is flipped upside down in the ocean currently. And the movie kind of ends with Orion and Mary Finch the maid. They're standing on the cliffside, just staring down at the wreckage. They're not moving. They're not trying to help. They're just like, well, if she's still alive, not for long. And as they're sort of like staring down at the like remains of this woman's wrecked car, Orion's employee from the architecture firm, Mr. Sloan, pulls up. He's like, hey, Orion, we got to get to that city council meeting.
Yeah, and then she's like, well, the housekeeper's like, well, I guess we'll just have breakfast first. And they go off, and then Orion just kind of like stares off to the distance, and that's it.
Yeah, it just ends. He's got to get back to work. It's the end of this case.
And can I mention right here, Luke, that the slight difference in the other version?
Well, let's get into final notes then. Like,
okay.
Do you have anything left to like? That's kind of the end of this episode, or the TV movie is she's dead. The case is wrapped up. All ghosts are satisfied, I suppose.
Yeah, all ghosts are. That was a better title. All ghosts are satisfied.
And Orion's got a city council meeting to get to.
As you do, and that's it. So, I mean, I don't think I have anything other. I think we covered it.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where it ends. But yeah, okay, this is actually a good time. Let us actually talk about the differences between this sort of film version that was released and the pilot version, the Haunted, that is available on this DVD, the I guess, 48-minute cut of it.
Well, I think the most clear major difference is this last act where, as I mentioned earlier, after Pauline is forced to stab herself, what is different in The Haunting, that's what it's called, right? The Haunting?
The Haunted.
The Haunted, excuse me. The Vivia comes over and sort of gives this speech about her mother and she loves her and blah, blah, blah. And she gets up, opens the door, and old blind boy's there. And he's like, I forgive you. And she sort of goes and hugs him and they go off, like they kind of like ride off into the sunset. And then we kind of cut to the very end, the same sort of thing. What's-his-face goes off to, Orion goes to look at the beach, but you'll notice there's no car there now, and the same sort of thing happens. The other guy that works at the company comes by and he's like, let's go to the meeting and stuff. So it was just, they cut out that whole sequence of Vivia also being punished. They sort of gave a slightly happier ending.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of exactly it. Like, it's the same up to the point where she's just like, I'm going to take myself to the cops and turn myself in now, open the door, and Henry's come back and he's like, I still love you, let's have a happy ending instead. So that is really the big difference. Like, the movie's a tragedy, the TV show is kind of a happier ending.
Mm-hmm. And what did you think of the two endings? What did you prefer? I mean, there's obviously, it's an extra beat. Like, it's like the movie version is, you think the ultimate action is going to be this woman stabbing herself, and they're like, nope, we got one more thing. But what did you think between the two?
I mean, I prefer the movie ending. I actually think it is a better ending and makes more sense. Like, honestly, the happy ending seemed very tacked on to the TV show. It did feel more like it just stopped. And they're like, I don't know, it's got to end somewhere.
I agree. I think it's better that everyone kind of gets punished.
And then I don't know what else you noticed about differences, but like one thing I did notice is there's less. The scary beats are toned down a bit. Like when they go to the mother's coffin in the movie version, Vivia throws open the coffin and there's like a cutaway into the coffin. You see like a decomposed skeleton corpse inside of the mother. And she's like, do you think this thing could lift a phone? Whereas in the TV show, there's no cutaway to the actual, I mean, quote unquote, gory shot of the mother. I
like that shot. I of watching the two versions, I do prefer the longer version. However, I think there's a tightness to the pilot version, the whatever hour version, that maybe is a little bit more watchable, but I think it does lose some of the more atmospheric elements that clearly were desired for this. And I think it does make like we've mentioned, like it looks really good and it's got this real feel to it with all these sort of scenes, but it does sort of drag a little bit. There's a little bit extra padding that you can feel onto it, but I didn't really mind.
Yeah, and I mean, the other big difference I noticed was just a slight reordering of the opening.
That's right.
It's a bit like what we see in this is we see a title sequence, we get to kind of sort of meet Martin Landau's character, and then we kind of get the setup to the plot of the movie, whereas in the TV show version, which makes a lot more sense to me when I saw it in the version, is that whole scene with meeting Henry and meeting Vivia and meeting Paulina. That's the cold open, basically. And then you kind of get an opening title sequence, which after watching that, I'm just like, oh, that restructure makes a lot more sense to me watching how it looked. It did feel awkward in the film version, but now it made perfect sense when I watched it. I'm like, right, that was the cold open. And then like it started like a proper TV show.
Yeah, it did have a little bit of a weird stutter start, but yeah, I mean, that's the ghost of Sierra de Cobre.
Yeah, I mean, those seem to be the big differences to me anyway, I noticed between the two. So, Jordan, everything I read proposed this as an anthology show along the lines of Outer Limits or Twilight Zone or something. I have some questions about that, but like, what do you think an average episode of the show is going to be?
I read that they were really trying to be a competition for both the Outer Limits and what's that one called?
Twilight Zone?
Twilight Zone.
Those two ones I just said?
Those two. That's right. The two ones you just said that I forgot immediately. They wanted it sort of to be that thing. So I think it's, obviously there's a haunting every week. What would be interesting, though, is are they just hauntings in his area? Because they seem to really want to establish his house as this base of operations. But I also got the sense that he's going to be wanting to go all over the world.
That's the one thing I noticed, too, and that I actually think was going to be the average episode. I don't think it's an anthology show. I think they're misusing the term here because I do think Martin Landau's character is going to be in every episode leading the investigation because they introduce him and Mary Finch and Mr. Sloan as sort of like, they feel more like regulars to me than
I think so too.
There's going to be a new episode next week and it's all new characters.
I think it's a ghost of the week.
Yeah. So I think I think that's the series as well. It's just weird. Everything I kept reading was like, it's like the Twilight Zone. I'm like, but that's not like the Twilight Zone. That's like Nightmare Cafe.
Yeah, I don't think it's like the Twilight Zone. I think what people mean is in terms of the level of spookiness and how it's sort of a thriller, sort of a horror. I think it's more of the tone and less of the style of the show.
Right. Yeah, not a true anthology. I think it was going to be the adventures of Nelson Orion and the spooky, spooky world he lives in.
Yeah, and some episodes you'll just be like, nope, not a ghost. It's Scooby-Doo, right?
I think every like fourth episode is just an architecture episode where he has to like go work on a project. There's no ghost stuff. Like you get 3 episodes, all ghost stuff. It's super spooky, and then every now and then it just like he goes to the office and you meet the wacky characters who work there.
It just is to add the realism of how to pay bills. Yeah, every 4th episode he's like, well, you guys want more ghost adventures. This is what it takes in the world.
Just a tonally different show with a completely different cast.
Yeah, these buildings are not going to restore themselves.
All right, Jordan. That's probably enough about this. You want to rate Ghost of Sierra de Cobre?
Mm-hmm. So we're gonna rate the version we watched, the hour and a half.
Yeah, I think we're gonna watch the finished version. I feel like the TV show is finished. I think what was truly released into the world officially was the movie version.
As we said, I think this looks really good. I think it has an interesting style. I think he's an interesting enough character, maybe not entirely developed in this. And I think the overall plot was interesting. I don't know if it was entirely effectively solved. They sort of set up, and then solved it really quickly. But I still kind of enjoyed it. I think it was better than I thought it was going to be. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10.
7 out of 10. Yeah, I was just like, it's not perfect. It suffers from age and like the pacing that comes with that, and kind of the way TV was structured back then. And, some silly bits, but the silly bits I even found very entertaining. Him picking up that woman on the beach.
Yeah, it was good.
Just like weird little side notes with Mr. Sloan coming in and constantly complaining about the architecture firm. Do they make a cohesive movie? Probably not, but like I really enjoyed them. And it looked gorgeous. I think maybe over the years of doing this podcast, Jordan, my metrics have been skewed and destroyed.
I agree.
This is an 8 for me.
No, I don't think we're too far off each other, but you're right. There's this after doing, several hundred of these episodes, not several hundred, but over 100 of these, you do get the sense of when someone seems to have really wanted something to make something different and interesting, and there's a level of care, even if it doesn't entirely work. And I think this falls into that category. You can tell maybe it's not always entirely effective, but the writing is really trying. Like that sort of speech I read earlier, it's like some of the writing's really good. It doesn't always work, and it looks great, and the actors are good. It's just that, it's not perfect, but man, compared to some of the stuff we watched where it feels like people just did it because they had to.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be hard-pressed to call this as a whole art, but there's an art to its making.
Oh yeah, there's elements of it within here.
But yeah, that wraps it up. Before we sign off for the evening, whenever you're listening to this, maybe it's the morning.
It's now that you're listening at 2 a.m.
We're doing a little promo swap with another podcast, the Short and Spooky podcast. So if you stick around to the end of the episode, you'll hear from the hosts of that to tell you a little bit about it. But I think it might be up the alley of people who listen to this, because they basically watch and review 80s anthology horror shows. So they'll watch an episode of like The Hitchhiker. They'll watch an episode of Friday the 13th. So you know what? Maybe if you like this kind of thing you're listening to now, you might like that kind of thing. But if you stick around to the end of the episode, you'll hear a little bit about it from the hosts themselves.
And they'll do a better job than we could ever.
Oh, absolutely. We do a terrible job at our own podcast.
Way to sell it.
But in the meantime, you can email us at continuumdrag@gmail.com. And of course, on Twitter and Instagram, we're going to have some clips from this TV movie, PV pilot /movie /whatever it is. The handle there is at continuumdrag. And that wraps it up. So thank you for joining us, listener. And Jordan, see you next week.
See you then. Continuum Drag is recorded in Toronto, Ontario. Theme music by James Rex Seidler. Produced by Jordan Dullock and Luke Black. Special thanks to Aaron Hughes.
Hey, Tommy.
Hey, John.
Do you like listening to podcasts?
I love it.
Do you like watching spooky stuff?
Oh, great. Yeah, I love it.
Are you still obsessed with the 80s and 90s?
Yeah, to this day.
Cool. So am I. If you are, then you'll probably like our podcast called Short and Spooky.
What's it about?
It's all about anthology shows like Are You Afraid of the Dark, Tales from the Crypt, Freddy's Nightmares.
What's an anthology show mean?
It's like a standalone, so you don't have to keep up with any plots or characters or anything.
So you can just tune in. Say you're a new listener, you can just tune into an episode and not have to worry about missing out on something you didn't hear before.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah, it is awesome. Check it out.